In my parents' eyes, I never existed. Have you ever felt that, no matter how much you strive in your family's eyes, you're still just an immature child? You have a stable job, colleagues trust you, and you stand firm in a harsh market. But every time you return home, your achievements suddenly become something that needs reevaluating. If you've ever experienced that feeling, perhaps you'll see yourself in this story. This is the journey of a daughter, from years of being underestimated for choosing an unconventional path to building a tech company worth tens of millions of dollars. But what's more important than that valuation is the journey of healing. The journey of finding her voice after years of living in silence and expectations from her dearest loved ones. The story doesn't begin with a press conference, not with a viral tweet. Instead, it starts with a family dinner, where a young woman stands up, calmly announcing that she has just turned down a dream job at a prestigious financial corporation. The reaction needed no words. Her father's astonished gaze, her mother's weary sigh, and her sister's meaningful silence. That alone was enough to kickstart a solitary journey. The journey of someone who dared to walk her path. Not to prove anything, but to live true to herself. I am Elena Brooks, 31 years old, founder of NovaCore Security Labs, a cybersecurity company recently valued at $20 million. But in my family's eyes, I'm still just Madison, the youngest child who's still playing at startups. Every achievement I've made, no matter how big, still isn't enough to shake their old belief that I'm off track. I've been different since childhood. My father is a seasoned financial expert who believes stability is the ultimate goal. My mother gave up her career to fully dedicate herself to our family. Meanwhile, I was immersed in business ideas even before I knew how to write reports. At 8, I opened a lemonade stand, not for fun, but to test profit margins. At 17, I sold jewelry online enough to open my own savings account. But to my parents, these were still just kids' stuff for fun. Rachel, my older sister, was the true role model. Attended Princeton like our father, studied finance, and immediately joined a prestigious company after graduation. As for me, despite earning scholarships, national awards, and choosing Boston University to study business, I was still considered someone who didn't try hard enough to get into Harvard. I didn't argue. I chose to prove myself through action. I founded a startup club at school, inviting entrepreneurs to share their experiences. During my internship, I rewrote the growth strategy for a small tech company, helping them increase revenue by 30% in 3 months. But all these achievements, when brought home, were dismissed. For my family, if you didn't follow the exact path they believed was safe, no matter how good you were, it was just risky. On the day I graduated from college, my father handed me a meticulously prepared folder. Inside were listings for apartments in a safe neighborhood, documents about a 401k retirement plan, and an interview invitation for Harper & Wynn Capital, where he had proactively arranged a suitable position. His voice was full of conviction. This is the path to success. Trust me, I've been there. I smiled and thanked him, but in reality, I had already made my choice. I signed a contract with Quantum Edge Systems, a small, lesser-known company with half the salary. But I knew that there I would learn everything from scratch, understanding every corner of a real business in depth. I didn't choose safety. I chose experience. The graduation celebration dinner quickly turned into a subtle debate. When I shared my choice, my father almost choked. "You rejected Jensen to work for a company no one knows about?" he asked, his voice higher than usual. My mother gently interjected. She always chooses the hard way to learn easy lessons. Rachel, my sister, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe this is just a stepping stone. After a few years, you can always go back to Jensen." But I understood they weren't listening to me. They didn't understand and didn't try to understand. In their world, safety was the destination. But for me, the path of discovery was essential, even if I had to walk it alone. At Quantum Edge Systems, I threw myself into work as if I were paying off a debt to myself. I took on extra tasks beyond my main role, worked late, studied more on weekends, and observed the company's operations inside and out. Every evening, I dedicated time to gradually building the idea for Stellar Tech, a cybersecurity solution aimed at small businesses that didn't have large budgets but were vulnerable targets for hackers. My parents didn't take these things seriously. Every Sunday at dinner, my father would repeatedly ask, "When will you get a truly stable job?" Whenever I excitedly talked about a small step forward, he would immediately change the subject. "Your sister just got promoted. Her boyfriend is a lawyer, a very stable family." I understood the underlying message. My story wasn't important. The hardest blow came when I accidentally overheard my father on the phone with a friend. "Madison is still playing at startups. She'll probably get over her delusions when reality hits." I was 26 years old, had a detailed business plan, a thorough market analysis, and knew what I wanted and why. But in my parents' eyes, I was still a child adrift in a childish dream. When I submitted my loan application to the bank, the person in charge didn't even read past the first page. "You should work for a few more years to gain experience," he said, "or find a male co-founder. That would be more convincing." That evening, I went home alone. I looked at my handwritten business plan, then looked in the mirror, and I swore I would prove that I could do it. Not just to my parents, but to everyone who had ever underestimated my abilities. I started Stellar Tech with everything I had: an idea, a business plan, and $15,000 saved over many years. My first office was in an old building in an industrial park on the outskirts of Boston. The elevator was often unreliable, the restroom was down the hall, and the walls were so thin I could hear the arguments from the design company next door. But for me, that place was a real beginning. I worked 18 hours a day, designing the website myself, writing marketing materials, researching the market, and building each service package. On the day I met my first client, a small accounting firm called Summit Ledger Company, I prepared for days. I arrived early, wearing my only suit, presenting each slide with all the confidence I could muster. But just 10 minutes later, the owner interrupted me. "Sounds good, but how many clients do you have already?" I answered carefully, "I'm in the process of building my client base." He shrugged. "Call me when you have experience." I sat in my car after the meeting, hands gripping the steering wheel, tears welling up not from sadness, but from a feeling of being trapped. No one would trust a business without clients. But no one would give you a chance if you didn't have experience. A familiar, vicious cycle. That night, I changed my strategy. I shifted my focus to small startups, those who were also just beginning their journey like me. I offered free security system checks, pointing out vulnerabilities they didn't even know existed. And it worked. Flora Swift, a flower delivery startup with only 5 employees, agreed to a trial contract. They paid very little. But they were my first client. From there, I secured 4 more small contracts. Not enough to pay myself, but enough to keep the office lights on. For 3 months, I lived on instant noodles, discounted vegetables, and instant coffee. But every day, I knew I was moving forward. Slow, solitary, but each step is still meaningful. Stellar Tech began to find its footing. Customers gradually increased, services improved, and for the first time, I could consistently pay my employees. But at home, nothing changed. Every Sunday dinner was still the familiar loop. I'd talk a little about the company and immediately be overshadowed by new updates about Rachel, my sister, who my parents always considered the ideal role model. She'd just gotten promoted. Her boyfriend was a lawyer, a prestigious family. Every time I tried to share something, my father would give a dismissive nod and immediately change the subject. "Your sister is now in charge of a large team. Very promising future." I'd smile, nod, but my heart would sink. No matter how hard I tried, they still only saw what was familiar as worthy of recognition. At a family wedding, I overheard my mother quietly telling Aunt Linda, "Madison is still doing something with computers. I'm quite worried, no benefits or pension at all." I stood behind them, unsure whether to step forward and explain or remain silent. In the end, I chose to quietly walk away. Even when Stellar Tech first became profitable, when I called to tell my mother the news, she only responded, "Oh, that's good." Then immediately asked, Have you met anyone interesting yet? The question seemed casual, but it made me pause. As if career success was just a stepping stone to something more important, starting a family. My father, meanwhile, still regularly sent emails with subject lines like, "Warning, tech bubble," or "Startup failures in a row. What's worth learning?" Each article he sent was like a reminder. What I was doing, in his eyes, was still just a game. I once thought that if I just tried hard enough, the results would speak for themselves. But I was wrong. For them, success, if not within a familiar framework, would always be a cause for concern. I once thought the hardest thing about starting a business was keeping it afloat through lean months. But it wasn't. What exhausted me more was constantly having to prove to my own family that what I was building wasn't just a game. When Nexabyte Global, a large corporation, offered to acquire Stellar Tech for millions of dollars, I declined. Not because I was naive, but because I believed the company had more potential. I wasn't ready to abandon the vision I had worked so hard to build just for a sense of security. The news spread quickly. I don't know how, but my father found out. He called the very next day. His voice wasn't loud, but it was cold. "You turned down Nexabyte Global?" I confirmed. Silence for a few seconds, then he said, "This Saturday, come for dinner. The whole family wants to talk." I didn't think much of it, but a bad feeling crept into my heart. Saturday evening, I returned to the house where I grew up. Everything was familiar, but the atmosphere wasn't. The living room was arranged like a meeting. My father sat at the head of the table with a thick stack of documents. My mother quietly made tea, and my sister and future brother-in-law were also present. I walked in and understood this was a true intervention. My father began with a detailed presentation. Startup failure rates, tech industry volatility, and the risks of declining an attractive acquisition offer. My mother was softer. "You can try it for a while, then it's not too late to get a stable job." Eric Porter, Rachel's fiancé, interjected as an experienced investor, advising me to listen to those who came before me. I remained silent. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew any explanation would only make them more certain that I was being stubborn. Then suddenly, Rachel blurted out, "Why is your name on the Chronicle Tech?" The whole room turned to look at her. She was holding her phone, and on the screen was a new notification from the Chronicle Tech, a list of the most powerful women in the tech industry. I was there, among the honorees. The room fell silent. My father took the phone, his eyes glued to the screen. $20 million? Your company is worth $20 million? He asked again, his voice a mix of astonishment and disbelief. Yes, and I turned down Nexabyte Global because I believe I can go even further. The answer wasn't meant to prove anything. It was just the truth. But that truth made the room fall into a suffocating silence. I stood up. No anger, no blame, just sadness. "Help begins with respect," I said. "And all these years, I've never received that." Then I left, leaving the intervention slides still on the table, along with the truth they could no longer deny. I had succeeded in my way. I thought that after that day, all my resentment would dissipate. But on the drive home, as the streetlights blurred past my car window, I didn't feel relieved. Only empty. I had just received what I had longed for all those years' recognition. But why did it feel incomplete? Perhaps because it didn't come from understanding, but from a name appearing on the Chronicle Tech. Instead of being proud because they understood what I had done, my family only acknowledged it when others spoke for me. My father's text came that night. "We just want to help you." But I wondered if it was helping out of concern, or helping to pull me back into the mold they were familiar with. My mother texted next. "Your father hasn't slept since then. He's worried about you." I know that's their way of showing love. But in my heart, love and doubt had never felt so distant. The person who surprised me the most was Rachel. She called for the first time not as the exemplary older sister, but as a real sister. "You're truly amazing. But why didn't you tell me?" I was silent for a few seconds, then said, "Because I'm tired. Because every time I tell, I have to prove it. I just want to be trusted for once without having to convince anyone." Rachel didn't say anything more, but I heard the regret in her held breath. I understand. My family didn't intentionally hurt me. They just hadn't learned to believe in something beyond their comprehension. But that doesn't make the wounds disappear, and no achievement can automatically soothe that feeling. I'm not angry at them, but I know recovery takes time. And it's not about forgiveness, but about finding myself again after so many years of being underestimated. After appearing in the Chronicle Tech, my inbox was flooded with messages. Not just from investors, but from young women, strangers, yet they understood me better than my own family. They shared stories of their dismissed dreams, of having to reassure adults instead of being themselves. One wrote, "You gave me the courage to move forward. I thought I was the only one." I suddenly understood. My journey was no longer a personal story. I started a small mentorship program for female founders who had been doubted, called Too Dreamy. We not only provided capital, but created a community where they could be heard, seen. Every week, I dedicated a session to talk, not as a CEO, but as someone who had once stood exactly where they were standing. During a conference, my father unexpectedly texted, "You make me proud, my child," even though it took me many years to realize it. I reread that message many times, not because I wanted confirmation, but because it was the first time he had written down what he had never said in 31 years. I didn't rush to reply, but a few weeks later, my mother proudly told me, "My church friends asked about your article. I showed them your picture in the Chronicle Tech. They are changing, slowly, imperfectly." But for the first time, I felt sincerity. I no longer needed their recognition. But if recognition comes from genuine effort, I am ready to accept it. Because healing doesn't mean erasing the pain. It means learning to move forward when the pain no longer blocks our way. The relationship with my family didn't change overnight, but gradually, small details began to soften the distance that I once thought was unbridgeable. My father started sending me articles that no longer carried warning headlines. Instead, he asked, "What's your opinion on this investment?" For the first time in my life, he sought my advice not as a daughter, but as a professional. My mother no longer asked when I would settle down or get married. She told me about the women in her book club, saying they wanted their daughters to be like me, brave and opinionated. And Rachel, my sister, who used to be the shadow that made me constantly try to prove myself. But now we have become partners. When I offered her the COO position, not out of favoritism, but because of her capability, Rachel sees the opportunity as if she had been waiting for it. We complement each other. I dream big. She delves into the details. I like to experiment, and she knows how to keep the organization running efficiently. And most importantly, for the first time, we were no longer rivals in a race for our parents' affection. I also started therapy, a personal decision that completely changed how I viewed old wounds. My therapist said something that stuck with me. Your parents may not change, but you have the right to change how you react to them. For the first time in my life, I stopped hoping they would become the people I needed. Instead, I began to see them as they truly were, full of limitations, but also full of effort in their way. A year after what they called an intervention motivated by worry, NovaCore Security Labs celebrated its 5th anniversary. From a damp office barely big enough for a desk, we now stood in a spacious venue with over 100 employees and a client network spanning multiple countries. But what moved me most that day wasn't the numbers, but the look in my father's eyes as he walked into the hall. He no longer asked if this quarter's growth was sustainable. Instead, he stood in front of a large poster with my picture on the cover of the Chronicle Tech magazine and quietly took a photo. My mother whispered, "Your father now carries that magazine around to show anyone who asks about you." For the first time, I didn't feel it was a victory, but a moment of being seen. Seeing that persistence, even when not immediately understood, can still sow the seeds of respect. I used to think success would be when they admitted they were wrong. But now, I understand. True success is when you no longer need recognition to know your worth. When you can forgive, not because they have completely changed, but because you have matured enough not to demand it anymore. My father once said, "Safety isn't exciting, but it pays the mortgage." As for me, after 5 years of venturing out, I learned a different version. Self-belief isn't safe, but it can answer the questions we carried throughout our youth. If you've ever felt like you had to strain to prove your worth to your dearest loved ones, then this story is here to remind you. The most valuable recognition doesn't come from others, but from the gaze you give yourself every time you look in the mirror. Some journeys don't need fireworks, don't need applause, just your belief to keep going, even if alone. And sometimes you will be the first and only one to see what you are building. Share your story in the comments if you've overcome doubts to pursue your dreams. Click like if this video touched something within you. Subscribe to the channel to continue accompanying courageous journeys, and send this video to someone who needs to hear that. Success doesn't necessarily need approval. It just needs you to believe in yourself.